Hello, everyone, and happy Wednesday. As part of our ongoing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series, we welcome you to today's webinar, Engaging Black Philanthropists. My name is Tony Bell, and I'm a trainer for the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy. I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, a couple of notes. This webinar will be conversational with the opportunity to ask questions during the webinar, as well as a Q&A following the presentation. Please submit any questions you have in the chat box using your GoToWebinar control panel. In the days following the webinar, you will receive an email with the slide deck and recording to review again at your leisure. You've got a cause, learn how to fund it. At the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy, our mission is to significantly increase your fundraising capabilities and the impact you have on communities and society through a proven contemporary curriculum, presented by world-class nonprofit leaders, best-in-class faculty, and renowned philanthropists. We want to recognize our important affiliate partners who provide training and education to fundraisers nationally. Check out the map to find an institute in your community. A special shout out to our affiliate, Xavier University of Louisiana, where they are hosting a watch party for today's webinar. How you doing, New Orleans? If you're on social media, please give us a shout out using the hashtag SIPWebinar and tag us. Now I am pleased to introduce today's presenter, a writer and project consultant, Ms. Valeda Fullwood. Described an ideal whisperer, Valeda brings unbridled imagination and a gift for harnessing wild ideas to her work as a writer, public speaker, and consultant on an array of projects and events. Valeda is the award-winning author of Giving Back, a 400-page hardcover book profiling stories of philanthropy among African Americans. Giving Back was named one of the 10 best Black books of 2011 and received the prestigious 2012 McAdam Book Award, which recognized the most inspirational and useful new book for the nonprofit sector. Valeda is a respected thought leader on Black philanthropy and community-led philanthropy. In 2015, the innovative museum exhibit, The Soul of Philanthropy, a reimagining of the book Giving Back, launched as one of the newest dimensions of her work and is now touring the country. She is also one of the architects of Black Philanthropy Month. Welcome, Valeda.
Thanks, Tony. Hi, I'm Valeda, and I'm excited about today's conversation. As Tony shared, I'm the author of the book Giving Back and also a creator for the exhibit, a multimedia exhibit, The Soul of Philanthropy. And I came to this work as a part of a giving circle. I'm a member of New Generation of African American Philanthropists. So I want to say hi to all my fellow circle members in Charlotte. And also a shout out to the folks at Xavier University in Louisiana with Ms. Lynetta Gilbert. So I want to say hello. Lynetta helped set me on this path in becoming a part of a giving circle. And so a good share of my work is around reframing portraits of philanthropy. And by that, I mean widening the lens on who is a philanthropist and who engages in philanthropy. I came to this work in my interest around this topic because I saw definitions of philanthropy being way too narrow and exclusive, and I felt that was unnecessary. I'm a curious community member and an engaged citizen. I'm a writer and storyteller. So that's what launched me into this work and my aim to reframe portraits of philanthropy. And I want to make clear that when I talk about Black philanthropy, it's a recognition of the influence of culture on how people give and an awareness of the spectrum of cultures of giving, like Jewish philanthropy, women's philanthropy. And while no group is a monolith or should be approached as a stereotype, there are some shared histories, widely held beliefs and values, and common experiences that characterize Black philanthropy and Black philanthropists. So to sum up why I want to engage and talk further around Black philanthropy in my effort to reframe portraits of philanthropy, conventional ideas around who's a philanthropist are narrow. I also have a desire to see us disrupt stereotypes that I believe undermine our communities and our philanthropic field. I also want to make clear, while there's no magic bullet approach, so if you tuned in for that, I'm sorry, but instead it's a matter of standard best practices of fundraising, which include building authentic relationships. And in this instance, with Black donors and engaging Black communities, it's important to have the historical context and be conscious of some of the cultural influences that shape how and why many of us give. So what we'll cover today, I'll share some history and insights that characterize traditions of Black philanthropy. And a lot of this is based on the 4.5 years I spent engaging Black donors and writing the book Giving Back. In that process, I interviewed over 200 Black donors and partnered with a photographer to capture the fact that philanthropy is deeper than your pockets. I also want to emphasize why Black giving matters and how to engage with Black donors and communities in meaningful ways. And I'll also share what you and your organization can do to deepen or establish relationships with Black donors. But first, a quiz. So among racial or ethnic groups, Black families are shown to contribute the largest portion of their wealth to charitable causes. What share of family wealth goes to charitable causes? 2%, 4%, 6%, or 8%?
You'll notice a quiz has launched on your screen, so please select your response. We'll have about 30 seconds to get responses for this quiz. Okay, about 5 more seconds and we'll see our results. Okay, great. Let's take a look at the results for our first quiz.
Oh, wow. You guys are pretty knowledgeable. I see the vast majority of people chose 8%, and that is correct. The answer is D, 8%, more than any other racial group in America. And that's based on data from the Urban Institute in DC. So today is February the 20th, 2019, and not only is it Black History Month, this year marks 400 years since the first documented arrival of Africans to the English colonies in America, close to what we now know as or call Hampton Roads, Virginia. And that occurred in 1619. So I'm going to start today's conversation by sharing a little history. And also to note, the famous Yale historian Robert Thompson stated, "Until you know how African you are, you will never know how American you are." So in that spirit, I'm sharing a few highlights, in fact, 4 stories from the 4 centuries about that help provide insight into how African Americans help shape what we know as American philanthropy. So one of my favorite stories is about Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. And some of you are familiar with their names because they were members of the clergy. Pretty significant. Richard Allen as a founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and Absalom Jones as an Episcopalian. But they're also founders of the Free African Society, which was a mutual aid society in the Philadelphia area. And the philanthropy story about them that inspires me is during the 1793 yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia. And during that time, it was rumored that people of African descent were immune to yellow fever. That wasn't true. Nevertheless, one of the key leaders in the city, Dr. Benjamin Rush, who was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, approached these two men, leaders in their community, to help tend to the sick and the dying during this crisis. So Richard Allen and Absalom Jones brought together members of the Free African Society who cared for people in the city and helped the city through this major crisis. And in doing so, helped frame elements and aspects of bringing people together, assembling groups, and thought leaders to address crisis when they hit communities. And so I'm inspired by them, and I think they are not only significant to the Black church and its significance in Black philanthropy and Black culture, but then also what we know as American philanthropy. Another story, another person whose story inspires me is Catherine Ferguson. And I think of her because even though she was illiterate, she started a school for child laborers in New York City. So Catherine escaped slavery. She married young, had 2 children who died in infancy. Her husband also passed. But she was inspired to help others, and she earned a living from baking cakes for parties and events. And with her resources, she helped establish the first Sunday school in New York. And in doing so, she brought children of all races to her home, children who were laborers and some of the poorest, most distressed people in the community into her home, to teach them to read using the Bible. And so I'm struck by her story because it was out of what she lacked, her being illiterate. She was inspired to help others. And she also gained prominence even at her time while she was living. And in her passing, it was cited in the New York Times. So she was recognized for her generosity and her philanthropy, even during her time frame, during that era. So again, I like to think of Catherine as having been robbed of education, but still started a school. Then another famous person who helped influence philanthropy and was a leader in the Black community is Madam C.J. Walker. She was born Sarah Breedlove, and I think of her as, after shattering ceilings, she opened doors for a lot of people, a lot of women, and created a lot of opportunity in her time. And if you're unfamiliar with her, she's an entrepreneur and was noted at her time as one of the wealthiest self-made Black women in America, one of the most famous wealthy women in America. And she contributed significantly to charitable causes and institutions, and made one of the largest gifts to the Indianapolis YMCA when it was being formed. She also, just before her passing, contributed a large share to the NAACP's anti-lynching fund. In fact, it was at the time one of the largest gifts ever received by NAACP. And I'm struck by her because she was born of parents who had were formerly enslaved, and she invested in improving herself and life for her family, and then for others as well, and became wealthy, but also very, very generous. And her story of philanthropy is a prominent case of social justice philanthropy in her efforts with the anti-lynching fund. And the fourth of the stories I wanted to share is about Mattel Dawson. He was based out of Detroit, Michigan. And I think of him, he was a forklift driver by trade, but he lifted hopes. Over the course of his lifetime, he gave over $1 million to universities and charitable organizations, oftentimes supporting scholarships. While he had a 9th grade education, he provided university degrees and opportunities to pursue studies for numerous people in the community, and he was noted for his philanthropy. And I think his coming from modest means and yet finding a way to give back is pretty significant. So as you see from these stories, many people identified as Black philanthropists over the centuries haven't always given out of abundance. In fact, it's often at great sacrifice. Based on their personal experience, they had a keen desire to make a difference, to give back, to create opportunities for other people. In fact, that's what brings us next in our conversation. That was some of the history, but then some of the principles that help define and characterize Black philanthropy based out of that experience and some cultural values. So one is opportunity. You heard that threaded through many of the stories I shared, that people want to create opportunities for others, in part because of a shared experience as being part of a marginalized community historically, and having proximity to issues and injustices in our community, and feeling a connection to others, wanting to create opportunities so others don't have the same struggle as these individuals may have. Another important principle that plays out today, but again has grounding in our history, is around responsiveness. I mentioned proximity to issues and concerns in our community. Well, many of us have had personal experiences or a few degrees of separation between people experiencing hardships and struggles. And so we're interested in giving in ways that truly seem responsive to actual needs in communities. Another principle is around mutuality, a recognition that, but for the grace of God, there go I, and the belief that if my life is improved, if your life is improved, my life is improved as well. In fact, Ubuntu is a Zulu principle or philosophy around I am because you are. And I think that is a strong factor in many of the ways we engage in philanthropy. I know it's significant for my giving circle and why and how we formed, and I heard it echoed in many of the interviews and people I've talked to over the last decade in working on this topic. Other principles I think people should be mindful of are that words matter. So much of the language that's sometimes used in philanthropy is too often centered solely on wealth and on whiteness. And I think awareness that there are other traditions and other experiences and other points of view is important. I know a few words that I'm a little sensitive to are when people talk about Black philanthropy, that we engage in informal philanthropy, or that our philanthropy is informal. While that's a piece of the picture, it's not it entirely. We created entire systems and ways of giving and structures for giving and institutions because we didn't have access to conventional or mainstream institutions and resources. And so over the centuries, many of those ways have become very formal in the context of the Black community. So when we talk about tradition or formal or informal, for me, it raises the question, formal for who or whose traditions? I think it's also important as groups engage or look to engage Black philanthropists that you're explicit. If you do have an interest in diversifying your pool of donors and volunteers, to when you reach out to communities, to say what you're interested in and why, and to be explicit in that conversation. Couching it as just diversity or diversifying is kind of a safe thing to say. So if you mean specifically Black women or people across the board in the Black community or next generation Black donors, I think you should be explicit in who you're looking to engage and why. Representation also matters. So again, another driving force in creating the book Giving Back and the Soul of Philanthropy exhibition was to bring imagery to our stories of giving in Black communities. Too often, I see a brochure or website of a nonprofit that expresses interest in diverse donors, but I don't see myself in the mix. And so then I have to question whether this is a place I want to invest my resources, my time, my talent. And I look for places that seem interested and have me represented. I think it's also notable of the collective giving traditions in our communities. I mentioned I'm part of a giving circle. And if you're unfamiliar with giving circles, I think of them sort of like a book club. Some can be very formal, some can be more loosely organized, but it's a group of people with shared values. And in this instance, it's shared values around philanthropy and giving back. For my giving circle, we pool our charitable dollars and make grants to nonprofits to improve our community. We also convene and organize civic engagement campaigns. So each circle generally has a flavor of its own, but it also comes from long traditions of giving collectively in Black communities. And so I think that's important to know, that sometimes when organizations seek to engage individual Black donors, it's also an opportunity to connect to collective giving groups that traditionally have existed in our communities. So whether it's a giving circle or perhaps a group at a church or part of a congregation, social and civic groups who pool their dollars and explore ways to give back. So that's also a channel or a system to tap into as you're exploring ways to diversify your donor pool. There are also fraternities and sororities. I mentioned the civic organizations, but wanted to specify that, as well as alumni associations, who many times have channels and ways of collecting resources and who are looking for ways to give their time or money to organizations in the community. And then, of course, another principle is around fairness and justness. So in hearing stories and of work in the community and what a nonprofit is doing, I often look at how conscious is the organization in addressing inequities, and how fair are they in engaging community and serving the community. And this is a key principle in engaging Black donors, how your organization is addressing inequities in community and lifting up more fair and equitable and equal practices. Again, much of this can be summed up by this famous quote by Martin Luther King: "Philanthropy is commendable, but it must not cause the philanthropist to overlook the circumstances of economic injustice that make philanthropy necessary." I think there's awareness in the Black community around this fact, this principle, and it shows oftentimes in how we engage in philanthropy as a sense of responsibility and a recognition that while we may have resources to share, that there are injustices that occur that even make that philanthropy necessary. So now I want to share some on why Black giving matters. So for starters, you can't be what you can't see, as is often said, and I believe that's true. Too often, with imagery and stories over the centuries in America, Black stories were absent and many stories were untold. And so I'm happy that over the last decade or so, increasingly, stories of Black philanthropists, some of the famous people I mentioned in the early 4 stories, but many others are being shared, which informs people outside the Black community about our giving, and then also within the Black giving, the next generation. And so it's really important that we lift up these stories to sustain our cultures and traditions of color, of traditions of giving in our community, but then also to engage more broadly outside the Black community and connecting to institutions and resources that historically we may not have had access to. Again, giving asserts our humanity and everyone's humanity. And I think it's important particularly to elevate this because we're living at a time where too often the headlines and depictions that we see seem to minimize Black humanity, and lifting it up is more important than ever. There's also America's increasing racial and ethnic diversity, and I think it's important for all of our organizations to be more representative of that diversity and the resources and assets and strengths that that brings. Also, I alluded to this earlier, as people in our communities, we have a distinctive line of sight and a vested interest oftentimes in seeing change. And that's why responsiveness is important. And that's why having a seat at the table and a voice in these conversations around philanthropy and community change is vital. In fact, imperative. Also, I believe that the issues we face today are too complex to leave it to a limited pool of people in our community. We need all hands on deck and need to engage a broader pool of givers. And I think of the given, and we talk in terms of time, talent, and treasure. I often think of it as our moves, minds, and money. So we're making moves and making connections that help change and improve communities and strengthen organizations in our communities. We also bring our minds, our best thinking, our cultural insights, our competencies to the mix to help address issues. And then we also bring our money and invest in the change that we are seeking in our communities. And I think it's obvious that if money alone solved community issues, then many things would have been solved long ago. And it takes more than that. So yes, the money is vital, but we also need distinctive perspectives and insights and voices to help drive the change. But again, another pop quiz. So the ratio of Black households make formal donations to charitable causes. What ratio? 1 in 3, 1 in 4, 2 in 3, or 2 in 4?
Once again, a quiz is going to launch on your screen. Please take a few moments to respond. We'll have about 30 seconds to gather everyone's responses. Thank you so much, Valida. About 5 more seconds and we'll close our quiz. Okay, great, Valida. Let's see what our participants had to say about this particular quiz.
Sharp. This group is really sharp. The answer is 2 and 3. 2 and 3 Black households give formally to charity and charitable causes, totaling over $11 billion a year. So yes, here's some data that's featured in the book Giving Back, but I'm interested in seeing more up-to-date data, and I know that there are some efforts underway and studies underway with various groups to focus more on Black philanthropy and share data, more recent data on Black giving. But the bottom line is that despite the wealth gap, which is real, Black Americans not only give a large share of their discretionary income to charity, but also the largest share of their wealth to charitable causes. Again, more than any other racial group in America. And in fact, we donate 25% more of our discretionary income than Americans of European descent. And again, as we just discussed, 2/3 of Black American households give to charity more formally, and a large share is not captured in this research. So again, this is a photo of my giving circle, and again, example of the importance of kind of seeing yourself in the mix. So I wanted to touch on building meaningful engagement. And so I say authentic relationship and a genuine interest. Too often I experience groups in the community who want a quick fix or want the benefits or the optics of diverse donors and diverse engagement, but not willing to invest the time and energy and to listen and to learn to have truly authentic relationships in Black communities. And this is vital. Again, part of our history as a marginalized people and community, we have a heightened sense of things, and sometimes are cynical about groups asking us for money. And so that relationship is key, and a sense of trust. And building that relationship takes time. I mentioned this at the start. It's an investment of time, and you got to listen and hear people's stories, hear where they're coming from, hear what their interests are. And this requires time and connections. And in the process, look to build bridges. And plan for ongoing engagement and to demonstrate your appreciation. So I often hear people share that, one, they aren't asked to give. So there's a large pool of people who are interested in giving and want to engage as philanthropists, but just aren't being asked. And then once you ask, to not make it a one-off deal, to keep the conversation flowing and to also show a multitude of ways over time that you appreciate their gift, and not only their gift, but other things they can bring to the table in terms of insights, connections to others, wisdom, and knowledge about the community. So part of the distrust is because there have been missteps and some squandered opportunities in the past. And so it is often a long game strategy, and you've got to commit to build these relationships going forward. And it's important to start now rather than delaying it any further. So I want to share an example or one mode or opportunity to engage Black donors, and that's Black Philanthropy Month. And some of you may be unfamiliar with it, but I'm happy to introduce you to it today. Black Philanthropy Month was founded by Dr. Jackie Copeland Carson. It's a global campaign every August to celebrate African descent giving in all its forms. We use it as an opportunity, or leverage it as an opportunity, to inform, inspire, involve, and invest in Black philanthropic leadership. And there's an opportunity for everyone with Black Philanthropy Month. While I'm one of the members of the architecture team, along with Dr. Carson, Jackie Copeland Carson, but then also Tracy Webb. The three of us work together to kind of lay a framework and theme for the year, but then we put it out to the community or to the world and invite people to engage as they see fit. So there's opportunities for individual donors to engage, for nonprofits, for universities, for the broad philanthropic sector to lift up and celebrate and invest in Black philanthropic leadership. So yeah, I like to say that while it's 1 month of concerted action, it is reflective and opens up possibilities for the entire year. And with this being February, we've got 6 months more or less to the start of Black Philanthropy Month. So now is a good time to begin thinking about it, and perhaps even planning what you can do to initiate relationships in Black communities and with Black donors, or to deepen relationships that you already have established. So I want to share some examples of what groups often do during August to connect with Black donors and to lift up the stories. One is storytelling, and that can be in a variety of ways. It can be film shorts. It can be radio interviews. It can be written narratives on your website or in your newsletter. You can do a donor profile and just lift up a particular Black donor that's affiliated with your organization or a Black volunteer and share how they're giving back and maybe the story behind their giving. Oftentimes groups host community conversations and educational forums. So maybe it's a specific topic, whether it's planned giving or forming a giving circle, or maybe in general just around the future of Black philanthropy, and highlight some historical aspects in the current community context in your city, and then explore what's possible going forward. There's plenty of social media engagement during Black Philanthropy Month. So sometimes they're tweet ups. People have online campaigns where they share images and stories and messages. There's lots of interaction and plenty of opportunities to kind of tap in and be a part of that online conversation. It's also an opportunity to host networking receptions with young donors and next generation donors, or to have a party or event that's meant as a donor appreciation. Another popular thing that we introduced a few years ago are proclamations. So your municipality or another group, sometimes the full state, sometimes the city or the county, will issue a proclamation in recognition and observance of Black Philanthropy Month. And we have a template, which is online at blackphilanthropymonth.org, that you can download and submit in your city or your state to have the governor or a city council person or the mayor issue the proclamation. It's also popular to host readings with discussion. And as a shameless plug, I will say that the collection of stories of over 200 Black donors in the book Giving Back is one source for readings. There's also poetry and essays from a variety of Black donors, or excuse me, Black writers and sometimes donors in sharing their stories. So to create time to do a reading and then discuss the themes and the issues that rise up in the story or poem. And there's also exhibitions of the soul of philanthropy. As I mentioned earlier, it's a reimagining of my book, Giving Back. And we have a pop-up edition, a comprehensive edition, and many times it can be an ambient element to a community conversation. So a way to bring some layering and some richness to the conversation in an artful way. This is an image from the Hampton Roads area, which last year celebrated Black Philanthropy Month for the first time. The community foundation there hosted it, and they were able to get proclamations, 7 proclamations from all the townships that comprise the Hampton Roads community. It was quite a feat and pretty impressive. So, if you're interested in getting a start on Black Philanthropy Month this year, 2019, again, it's pretty significant because, in fact, that 400-year commemoration will officially take place in August, which is when the first Africans arrived America as enslaved people in 1619. So this year for Black Philanthropy Month is pretty significant. When we have our history and a lot of the grounding that I shared today, I see Black philanthropy as helping to shape the future of the Black community and Black lives in America. So start planning today. As I mentioned, you can initiate or re-energize some effort you have underway to engage Black community members and then sustain it on a regular basis. If you don't presently have the relationships to lead such an effort or the resources to lead such an effort, collaborate with others. Perhaps another nonprofit or philanthropic entity in your community or a legacy Black organization. So to sum up, before we open for questions, just keep listening and learning, being open to learning. That's key. Stay mindful of how cultural values and beliefs and interests influence giving. So again, no group is a monolith or a stereotype. There are a variety of stories, but there are some core shared beliefs and experiences that can influence how people and why people give. Also to recognize that there's great diversity within the Black community. While my book and much of my work has centered on African American giving, particularly in the South, because that's what I know and that's what I grew up with and that's where I'm from, there are a range of stories from the West Indies, from African immigrants, from across the continent, and each group has its stories. There are also Afro-Latinos and their stories and experiences. Oftentimes there are shared core based on that sense of mutuality or Ubuntu that I mentioned at the start that are threaded through all of our giving. But the stories vary and the practices vary. And that's part of the learning experience. Be sure to follow hashtag BPM365 for more stories and ideas. That's the hashtag for Black Philanthropy Month or the Black Philanthropy Movement. You can see stories of individuals, donor profiles, ideas for what you might do this August and even afterward. So now I will turn it back over to Tony, who will help moderate the conversation in the Q&A. Tony?
Great. Thank you. Yes, thank you so much, Valeda. A lot of great information. We have some really incredible questions coming in. So please, folks, make sure if you have any questions or comments that you share them with us via the question section of your GoToWebinar control panel. So Valeda, someone asked if you could please repeat, when you said words matter, could you please repeat the problematic phrases that you mentioned?
Yeah, and these are few with me personally, but I'm sharing them with you. So one, sometimes it's the use of the word tradition or traditional philanthropy. And I know, again, this is a pet peeve, but it's just that and something to take note of. And it could be an issue with others as well. But when we talk about traditional philanthropy, for me, it raises the question, whose philanthropy? Because there are centuries-old traditions in Black communities. So if you are meaning non-Black traditions, then say that explicitly or speak to whose traditions you're referring to. If you're talking about traditions from your own personal experience and you're, come from a Irish immigrant family, then speak to that specifically. But the broad use of the term traditional philanthropy, and in a similar vein, words like or phrases like informal philanthropy and formal philanthropy. Again, say what you mean what you say. Are you meaning institutional philanthropy among predominantly white institutions? What specifically do you mean? And I think there was one other I may have mentioned. Oh, I know. The word diversity as like a safe word and or a word that's safe and so broad. What do you mean when you really say it? So is it everybody but the Black community, or is it specifically the Black community or marginalized communities or the Latino community or the gay and lesbian communities? Mean what you say what you mean. So specify and lift up the groups you are looking to engage and the donors you do want to reach. And diversity does not say it all.
Great. Thank you so much. And kind of keeping along with this theme of words matter, someone else asked, do you think the term philanthropy is off-putting to people of color?
Yes, I often hear that. And for me, I choose to demystify the word and to deconstruct the word to help make it more inclusive. And for me, historically, philanthropy breaks down as love of humankind, love of humanity, and I think of it as love of what it means to be human. So breaking it down so it is as non-threatening, as inclusive as possible. Love of what it means to be human. And I do recognize that some people like to just steer clear of it altogether, and I do see why that would be important. I choose to embrace it and to reframe it so it is more inclusive. My book, Giving Back, I titled it Giving Back, A Tribute to Generations of African American Philanthropists, as a way to bridge the two words. I mean, giving back is a phrase that's commonly used in the Black community and in other communities as well, but it really speaks to our spirit of acknowledgement of the support and sacrifice of others to create opportunities for us. So that particular phrase is of significance in the Black community, but I also recognize the phrase giving back doesn't work in every community. Some groups of philanthropists are offended by that phrase or don't use it and embrace it the way I think it's used in the Black community. So I like to bridge the two, but I do recognize just the word alone is hard to pronounce sometimes, but then also can be a barrier in and of itself.
Excellent. Thank you again. So we have so many great questions coming in, and I'm going to kind of throw them out at you, in order of receiving them. What organizations do you see that are stewarding Black philanthropists well? Are there any out there that you see that are just doing a really great job of stewarding Black philanthropists?
Yeah, I think that's beyond my experience or knowledge to speak on. So um, I don't have an answer to that. Maybe some others do. I will say, I know many of our historically Black universities and colleges have done a great job, some more than others. And oftentimes, I believe it's Claflin University in South Carolina is often cited for its amazing fundraising practices and the professionals and how they engage their alumni network and their donors. So that's one example I've seen, but I can't speak to that in a broad sense.
No problem. Thank you. That's a great example. Quite a few people are asking, does any of your data show where Black donor dollars are going?
Right. I know there is data out there about it, specific data that shows the breakdown. I don't have that information specifically, but I do know as I spoke to people, of course, traditionally or historically in the Black community, a lot of our dollars go to the church and to faith-based institutions, and that's an important part of our community. And many of those principles and influences are shaped by our experiences with the church. But beyond that, I found interest across the board, whether it's the arts and culture, education is key, and as well as other topics that areas that people don't always think about, whether it's the environment or climate and other issues that aren't often associated with the Black community. I think when environmental issues, environmental justice, when the fairness and justness and equity part of it comes into play and is lifted up, I think organizations have a better chance of cultivating relationships with Black donors, regardless of the focus area or sector.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, because a question came in, can you speak to the history and impact of religious giving in Black philanthropy and its influence on other giving? So do you think that covers that?
Pardon?
Do you think that covers that question?
Yes, for the most part. I mean, only other thing I will add specifically on that is that in the interviews I had with Black donors in the course of the book, and even in conversations since, the church is often the first place people have experiences with giving, and sometimes it's not good. So sometimes it has had a negative impact, but more often than not, at least the initial lessons about giving and the practice of giving, and then beliefs around our responsibility to give are formed early on in the church and show up throughout our lives. So other than the church being a significant place to help shape and frame how we approach our giving as being still a prominent force in our communities, but not exclusively.
Excellent. And we have a lot of people asking about where they can get your book.
Wow, yes. Well, the book came out 7 years ago, so it's hard to find on Amazon, but you can reach out to me and I can, I think Tony's going to share my contact information. You can reach out to me and place an order and we can get you a copy of the book. I always like to add that Giving Back is the book that gives back, and it's designed to give back to the community. So every book purchased, 100% of the proceeds actually go to my giving circle and help advance our work around in giving, in grant making, and in civic engagement.
Excellent. And that ties greatly into a question that we received. Does your giving circle discuss how to express community need from a place of worth rather than from a place of lacking?
Yes. In fact, we just had our winter advance a couple of weeks ago, and that was a key conversation in how we do more of that, how we're more explicit about that going forward. And I think that's one of the strengths of Black giving circles, is that we can help lead philanthropy in how to be more inclusive in our language and in how we engage Black donors and how we lift up concerns in the Black community.
Excellent, thank you. And let's see here. Yes, in your experience, what are the most responsive ways to engage next-gen Black philanthropists? So there have been quite a few questions coming in about just the different generations of Black giving.
Right. Well, I will say with my giving circle, it's new generation of African American philanthropists, and in reality, it's multiple generations present. And we just learn from each other in our conversations. I think, the data shows the use of technology being important to younger generations, but then also ways to engage and making the case for why to give is key. The sense of responsibility that perhaps older generations had, that it's just something you do. You don't ask questions, you just write the check and support core organizations in our community. That mindset, it has shifted for the most part, that there are more opportunities to give, more opportunities for Black donors to give, and access to more organizations, that making the case why to give and how to give beyond dollars, I think, is key. How to invest your time and how the time is valued by the organization. So
Excellent.
Yeah, I would just add to that point, my giving circle, we are about the moves, mind and money collectively, how we bring all of that to how we give.
Excellent. And then just one last question, then unfortunately we have to wrap it up and move on. This is really great. How do you recommend getting our organizational leadership on board with engaging a more diverse donor portfolio?
Well, I would just pull from the values of your organization and draw relevant points to how to live up to those values. So if community is important, if true change is important, then it's vital that you have representation and voices from across the community. And I do know that conversation can be difficult. And while for me it seems a no-brainer and obvious and an imperative, that's not the case with all organizations or with everybody within the organization. But as I mentioned, already organizations are struggling to make gains. Those who are committed to it, engaging more Black donors, are behind the curve to some degree because it's lagged for decades and generations. And so I just say now is the time, as we look at our communities and see the growing diversity and the shift in thinking and in leadership, that you need to get on board and make some inroads and make a commitment to engage Black donors and just donors in general from communities of color.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Valeda. And thank you too, everyone, for participating in our Q&A and for your incredible questions. So of course, like always, we want to keep this conversation going. So if you have additional questions, please let us know on social media. Tag us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, always using the hashtag #SIPWebinar. And also, if you'd like to contact Valeda, right here on your screen is all of her contact information. You'll also receive this information when you get the slide deck and a follow-up email in the next few days. So Valeda, just lastly, what is the most important takeaway for our webinar participants?
My takeaway is remembering that philanthropy is deeper than your pockets. And to get to that depth takes some time and investment of your energy and interest, and to listen to folks.
Well, thank you again, Valeda. We can't, again, thank you enough for being part of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series. Don't miss our next webinar, folks, which comes up on March 20th, Call Selling, the 8-step cycle that fundraisers need to know. It's the most critical tool you can utilize in today's competitive market. So don't wait, register today. Thank you again to our audience for your time and participation, again to Valeda for all of her great information. To help us continue to improve our monthly webinar series and ensure we are providing value to our audience, please take a few minutes to complete our survey. In closing, enjoy the rest of your day and thank you for all that you do to better the communities in which we live, work, and play. We'll see you on March 20th.